dad died 2 years ago.
And my grandpa died and my bubby died.
My grandpa died when I was 6 years old. My grandmother died when I was 8. I wasn't prepared at all, even though I knew that she was really sick. The thought really never crossed my mind that she could die. I didn't think it was fair that she had died and left me. I didn't quite understand why everybody was crying over this. I needed to understand why everybody was so upset.
If we want our children to grow and to mature and to be able to cope with life, we should consider it our obligation and responsibility to introduce to them at a young age the significance and the meaning of death. For if we fail to do this, then death will remain a mystery, and children will place in that locked cellar, or that locked door, their worst and unimaginable fears.
It's still scary if you know the truth, but it's scarier if you don't know.
I wasn't told until a few days after she died, even though my parents knew.
Kids need and kids want to be part of life. And death is a part of life. And they want to be part of something meaningful. And what Jewish tradition does so magnificently is it celebrates life. And that's the message of Judaism, that we can take somebody's life through loss and make it meaningful. What a great tradition. Whether a child is 5 or 10 or 8, it doesn't really matter. The truth of the matter is kids want to know what happened. They want the details. They want to know what happened. That's part of being a kid, and we are there to provide the honest and open answers that will get them to the next question.
Getting a terminal diagnosis is not like I think people would expect. There's lots of denial. I recently said to my children in comparing their loss to the loss that their cousin had of her father, which was a sudden loss, I said to my children, we had time to prepare, and she didn't. And my children looked at me and said, we didn't have any time to prepare. And I said, well, we talked all the time about the fact that Daddy was going to die. And they looked at me and said, no, we didn't believe you. We really didn't believe you.
My mom told me that my dad had a sickness called Shydreger. Every night I said I love you and I kissed him goodnight.
Everybody I asked who lost their parent as a child, these are adults now, that they were left out of everything. Didn't know their dads were sick, didn't know it was terminal, didn't know what was happening. Nothing was explained to them beforehand, didn't realize what the funeral experience was going to be like, what the cemetery was going to be like. And I was determined that that was not going to happen to my children.
One of the things that I think is most surprising to parents is how most of this information is so accessible and easy for kids to comprehend. Most parents are totally freaked out, and yet once they hear it, it's like, oh, okay. And what's important for them to know is they just need information.
I wasn't prepared at all, even though I knew that she was really sick. The thought really never crossed my mind that she could die. I wasn't told until I was picking out a present for her to take to the hospital. I was mad at them that they didn't tell me earlier, and I was also upset because I had been really, really close with my grandmother.
I believe it is very difficult for parents to talk to children about death and dying because it is the ultimate in loss of control. And parents have a very difficult time with loss of control. And they also have a difficult time talking to their children about something that may cause their children pain.
And most parents don't think their kids are capable of handling it. Why is that? Because they probably weren't when they were that age. The problem is nobody was talking to them. What's wonderful is that we are.
I remember that it was one thing to sit in the doctor's waiting room at the hospital and be told that your daughter was going to die. It was an entirely much more traumatic experience to have to come home and tell the children.
And we learned really fast that our kids could handle the truth about everything much better than half-truths or silence. And we really never hid anything from them about her illness and her diagnosis and what was going to happen. And I think that helped so much because they trusted us.
Before we brought Jane home, we brought him up to the University of Michigan Hospital when she was in intensive care with all of the tubes. And they said to us then, bring him up, show him this. Because what they're imagining right now is even worse than what this is.
We asked the children, they were going to school every day, and we asked them, if she dies while you're at school, do you want us to come get you? And they said yes.
She ended up dying while they were at school, and we went and got, I went to the school and got the kids and brought them home. And that's still something that they talk about today.
I think that a child, anybody, needs closure to a subject. And when my daughter was 3 years old, her great-grandfather died.
My mom told me that when people die, that they go to heaven.
And she said to me, well, how did he get there? And I said, well, God took him there. And she said, well, is he coming back? And then I said to her, and I remember looking right at her and saying, no, he is not coming back. When somebody goes to heaven, they don't come back.
Just because his body's not here, it does not mean that he's not. He's still here. I can think of him easily. Eddie was the man who owned the service station around the corner from my house. And he's almost sort of like an uncle. Even though I already have uncles, that's like the kind of role he played to me, I think. He was such a great man. He helped out so many people. And he was such a loving person. I couldn't understand why God would have him to die.
My grandpa died when I was 6 years old. My mom was very upset, and I wanted to understand why she was so upset. I wanted to know what he looked like and what type of condition he was in before he died. I needed to see him.
When it's time for adults to tell their children that somebody has died, I think that the best thing would be to tell them straight out like they're an adult, because otherwise it makes the children feel like they're real small children and that nobody understands them, because when somebody dies, we think about it just as seriously as adults do.
When I'm asked whether or not a child should come to the funeral, it's not whether they should come to the funeral, but it's how they come to the funeral.
I think parents are just as afraid of death as children are, because it's the kind of thing that everybody can be afraid of.
Everybody tells me how sensitive their child is and so forth, and I sort of, again, break it down to one very simple fact. When was the last celebration? Did you celebrate your dad's 70th birthday? Yes. Was he there? Oh, of course. Well, what we have here is something called a celebration of life. We're not celebrating his 70th birthday. We're celebrating his 70 years of life. What is it about the celebration of life that you feel that your child can't understand?
I certainly feel like we were celebrating her because, like I said before, funerals are more of celebrations of the person's life than grieving of their death.
When you sit down with the rabbi prior to the funeral, that event is almost important as the funeral itself. That's when you sit down and you talk in loving terms about the person who died. You tell great stories. People laugh. People cry. And more importantly, for children, they are introduced oftentimes to a person that they didn't know.
Some of the stories that my mom told, I'd never heard before. She just said stories that were so funny about what he's done.
I think that kids should be part of it because you can always sit down and listen to all the good memories. And when you think of the good memories, you know that they're right there in your heart and they're watching down on you. and you know that they'll always remember you, just like you'll always remember them.
So when kids sit down, I tell parents, be there, have the kids there. Make sure they sit down and they can be quiet for a little bit and just listen to the story and the legacy of the person that we're talking about. It's such a great opportunity to listen, to learn, and to love.
When the rabbi comes for a funeral, he will say some stuff in Hebrew. He will say prayers to keep them safe and not let them be harmed and let them to rest in peace. They will give you memories.
I would have liked to have been part of the prayers. I would have liked to have known the different prayers that we were supposed to say and have been able to take part with them.
I don't know all the prayers, but I sort of just pray in my mind, and I think that they understand and that that's the same kind of thing.
May the Lord bless you and guard you. The most sacred object in Judaism is the Torah scroll, because that scroll contains the letters of faith, the letters that are part of God's message to the Jewish people and to humanity. The sages say that something that's even more sacred than a Torah scroll, as sacred as it is a human being, because a human being is made in the image of God. And therefore, a human being, like a Torah scroll, must be protected and guarded. The body is holy because it is the repository of the soul. And even though the soul has departed to its eternal place, the body remains holy and must be so treated with reverence and dignity. Therefore, there is to be provided a shomer, a guardian, who is with the body from the time of death until the time of burial. And the shomer recites passages from the Psalms or from the other sacred literature of the Jewish people.
It was helpful to know that somebody was with him, like, at all times, because so he wouldn't be lonely.
When people hear about a ritual called Tahara, the bathing of the body by members of a group called the Hever Kadisha, it's a beautiful procedure. It's a wonderful tradition. It's not something that a funeral home invented. It's something we've been doing for thousands of years.
The deceased is garbed in certain clothes called tachrichim, or shrouds, the same for everyone. From the first century, when a great sage saw that the very wealthy provided very elaborate costumes for the burial of their dear ones, the poor could provide only simple linen cloth. And he decreed that just as we are equal at birth, so should we be equal at death, and therefore tachrichin, or shrouds, were established for all.
Well, one of the things that parents often tell me is they don't want the child involved, and they don't think that the child can be involved. When you look at our history, when you look at our heritage, people were born in the home and they died in the home. You didn't say to a 5-year-old kid, Grandma's going to die in 6 months, so you need to leave and we'll call you in a year when it's over. That wasn't the way it was. It was part of a natural process called life. And so oftentimes today, people are dying in homes. So if that occurs and the child is part of that process, I have no problems with just closing the casket and so forth. But if there's no vision of the death and there's no vision, somebody just dies very suddenly and so forth, it could be very difficult for the child to imagine. And oftentimes it's important for the kids and the family to just see the person so that they can just know that this is real, it's final, and now it's our job to go on with life, living without this person.
And when I looked at her before the coffin closed, I just thought of all the good memories I had with her.
They were very comfortable, even with Jane dead in the casket. And so they sat in that room with me for whatever it was, a half hour before the funeral started.
I wanted to have a good memory of her, but I thought it was also going to be scary. But when I went in there, she looked really pretty, and I wasn't as scared as I thought I would be.
They have funerals so that It's sort of like respecting whoever died, like paying your last dues. You respect the good things that they've done, and it's not really a place that you should be scared or sad, because in my grandmother's case, she suffered for a really long time, and my mom's only way of comforting me was to tell me that she was done suffering now that she died.
When parents say to me, I'll tell you what, my child will come to the funeral home but won't go to the cemetery, it's kind of like saying, I'll give my child hors d'oeuvres, but I'm not going to serve them the full dinner. I think it's really important for a child to see the procedure. Where is my grandfather going from here?
But your papa asked me to tell you at the funeral that you were the joy in his life, and you should always remember how happy you made him. He knew that you loved him, and that was the best medicine in the world. For his youngest grandchildren, Sarah and Merrill, the best memory was of your papa at your birthday parties, doing magic tricks for all of the kids. We will miss him. But whenever we care about each other, as he cared about each of us, we know that we will feel his presence. We pray now that his loving and beloved soul has found peace and life eternal, having returned to the source of all life, having returned to God. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we will remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember him. So long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. We rise now for the Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah v'alma divrach Yeruteh. Those of you who would like to remain for the lowering and the placing of earth on the casket, fulfilling that traditional mitzvah, you may be able to do so.
When they go to the cemetery, when they're part of the casket being lowered into the ground and they see all of it, it may be painful, it may cause tears, it may cause a little bit of anxiety, but it's also going to answer questions. And I think one of the things that Judaism does in a beautiful way is it provides closure.
When they put Jane into the grave, and I was sad, but I just felt strong. I just felt strong, and I shouldn't cry. But now I know it's okay to cry.
My son just was still in this mode of being protective big brother. He wasn't ready to give up that role, and he didn't take his eyes off of this coffin being lowered into the ground.
I helped put dirt in the grave, and I felt that was pretty important. I just felt better if I did that than I didn't.
The sound of the dirt hitting the coffin is so graphic that it makes you realize this is happening. This isn't a dream, a nightmare, a fantasy. It sort of makes you take, get a grip.
When it was explained to my children that we were going to bury Daddy, that his friends and family were going to bury Daddy, and they asked how, and it was explained to them that we were going to shovel the dirt, they expressed very strongly that they wanted to participate in that.
I put dirt on the casket, and it was important because I felt like I was helping bury my dad.
Indeed, it is painful to hear the thud of the earth upon the casket. But this forces the mourner to confront the reality of death. And it is only after that confrontation that the healing process can begin.
It was scary, but it was sort of comforting to know that she was going under the ground. Probably because I knew that she was safe.
When you look at their grave, you'll know that they're there, and they're in your heart, and they're up in heaven. And they're always watching down on you, so it makes you feel good inside.
I go back to her cemetery and bring flowers to her, and we give her like a few toys, and we're just like talking to her. And I say Kaddish when I'm at the cemetery. We're saying a prayer to her, that we still love her and we're still part of her family.
The Kaddish serves to remind the mourner both of the hope for the future, of his responsibility and mission, and at the same time to understand that faith will be renewed day by day, month by month, and in that renewal, the mourner will find healing. Shiva refers to the 7 days of mourning. A scholar of recent centuries pointed out that it took God a week to make the world, and therefore the week is significant because we lose a world when we lose a human being.
I felt like the Shiva was one great big hug from the world. I felt so much support and so much caring that it was actually overwhelming. I know that my kids felt that too. It was wonderful that people brought their children. I thought that people might be afraid to come to my house with their children. And I just let my kids do what they wanted to do. My kids went outside in the backyard and played, and there may have been people who thought those children should be sitting in this house crying, but I knew that there was plenty of time to cry.
It's important for adults to talk to kids at the Shiva house because, like, if you talk to the kids, then they feel, like, important because the grown-ups are always around the grown-ups and talking and stuff.
Shiva was more of a time to celebrate his life than the service itself.
My mom and dad's friends came over. They talked to me about Jane, and it just helped me feel better talking about it with a grown-up.
I always take my children to Shiva houses. That's something I learned, to not shelter your children from death, but explain it to them and to let them find their own way of comforting somebody else, and I think that it makes them better people.
It's important for kids to go to Shiva homes, especially for people that they know, like good friends or family, especially because, again, the family's going through a very hard time. And even I think it makes the family that's sitting Shiva feel better to know that so many people care.
Our service begins on page 15. Let us please rise for the Borachu. Borachu et Adonai.
The worst part about death for a child is that they don't feel safe or secure, and structure helps them do that. Rituals help them do that. And whether it is that they know their parents are going to say Kaddish, whether they light a candle at the yard site, whatever it may be, that ritual makes them feel safe and makes them feel closer to the person that they lost. It's a connection.
When she died, I wasn't thinking at all about the fact that I was Jewish, but that the fact that my grandmother just died. But I think afterwards, when I realized that what the customs we had gone through were for, and that I was Jewish and that made a difference when she died, that helped me.
When a child asks an inevitable question, why did my loved one die? Why did my grandparent die? Why did my beloved person die? The first thing we should consider is to understand and to listen and to pay attention to what the child is asking. We sometimes don't realize the way and the depth of the grief and the sorrow and the loss of a child.
I wish that like he could be there for my bat mitzvah and my wedding and stuff. So I wish that he could be there for that.
What parents need most to know is that the child is really suffering from separation. It's not death that they are as concerned about as it is separation.
One of the questions also that I get is, am I going to die? At that particular point, most of their parents go, because that's the most difficult thing for parents to confess to their kids. What I do is I look at them and I say, you see this desk? Can this desk die? And they go, no. You see this chair? Can this chair die? No. Well, there's a courtyard out there and there's a tree. Can that tree die? Yes. You see the bird that's on that tree? Can that bird die? Yes. What are we talking about here? Everything that lives will eventually die. And when you explain it in that context, it's like, it's no big deal. Oh, I see. And then oftentimes it's helpful for kids if you talk about lifespans. Most adults today that are born live to be 80 years old. How old are you? Oh, you're 6? That means you've got 74 years left before we even need to start worrying about it.
But most children ask and are concerned about their own safety. Is the other parent? Am I going to lose my other parent? Am I going to lose my other brother? Am I going to lose all my grandparents? Am I going to die?
I think Jenny and Becca are most fearful they're going to lose me too. Their biggest fear, I think, is that something is going to happen to me.
Like after a while, I remember that me and Becca were worried that our mom was going to die.
I also explain to my children that everybody doesn't grieve in the same way. That some people cry a lot, that some people are mad, because I think that that's true about adults and children. And that everybody has their own time to grieve, which I think a lot of us don't recognize. People think it's like this 6 month or this 1 year, and I can tell you from personal experience, that's not what it's like.
Parents grieving and children grieving in the same family is a very difficult situation because the child has his own loss and then he's lost the grieving parent as well, because when dad used to come in, and come on, get on my back and let's do this, that's the dad he's used to, and finally he sees his dad sitting in a chair crying, it can be very disturbing to him. What needs to be is parents need to be honest about their grief because it gives children permission to have their own grief, but they also have to understand what's going on. So a dad may pull his child on his lap and say, yes, I am crying for Grandpa. I miss him very much.
One thing that happens is parents will say to me, that they don't think their kid can handle it. And then after the funeral, the first night of Shiva, they'll call me at home and they'll say, you're not going to believe this. My kid wants to sleep over at a friend's house. What should I do? And I'll say, let him sleep at a friend's. They said, but he cried all day long. You know what? You cannot take the kid out of being a kid. He's still a kid. He's a kid grieving, and kids grieve very differently. Let them be a kid. The grief will come soon enough. Let them sleep over at their friend's house. And they say, are you sure this is okay? It's fine. It's not a problem.
The process goes on forever. It really does. Not the pain necessarily, but they have to learn to live their life around the pain.
Like if it's easier for you to talk about it or write about it, then you should do whichever is easier. When I wrote about it, I got all my feelings out, and then I would show my mom, and she could read it, and then we could talk about it because that was easier.
The greatest challenge to faith occurs when we lose a loved one. It is at that moment that we ask, is there a God in the world? And if there is a God, how did he allow my parent, my wife, my husband, my child, my brother, my sister to be taken? It is precisely at that moment that the tradition says the mourner must stand up and say, Yitgadal v'yitgadash Shemei Rabbah. Magnified and sanctified be God's great name. Precisely because the mourner is struggling with faith, the tradition declares it is at such a time that you must stand up and declare your faith.
I think when somebody dies, it makes room for new birth, sort of like trees. When some trees get burned down, new ones, it makes new ones come up. So I think God sort of handles that with himself.
One of the questions I get also is, if his body or her body is going into the ground, how does he or she get up to heaven? What do you believe happens? When a person's body stops working, do you believe in the soul? What do you believe? And oftentimes I get stories that are pretty elaborate stories about angels, and that, and then I look at the parents who have told me that their kid has never experienced death and never thought about it. Believe me, this didn't come overnight. The kids have thought about it for a long time.
I thought about death and dying all the time because it's one of my biggest fears.
In my bedroom, I have this little picture on a wall, and it's with a house and a wonderful garden and a tree. And I always look up at it when I'm scared or I feel bad. And I feel that all my relatives that died are looking down on me, even the ones I never knew.
I think the spirit, or like your soul, it stays forever. No matter what happens, body's just used for like part-time.
Children are innately spiritual. They innately feel that God does control things and that they can count on God and that God is more like a person.
I just think of different reasons why it had to happen to us. One of the reasons I think is that Jane was one of God's kids, and he was going on vacation, and he picked us to take care of her since we were such a good family. And he thought we'd take good care of her. And then when he came back, she had to die to go back to him.
When you die, your spirit stays with the people that you love because it wouldn't be doing you any good 6 feet under.
I think his soul is up there and he's able to reach out and sort of touch, and just a little bit of his soul is with everybody that ever met him.
I think about her in my heart, and I think about her in a better place.
I just think he is much happier in heaven than he would ever be down here suffering.
It was Eddie's time to die. I'm not sure why. He was such a great man, and he had such a powerful impact on people. I'm not sure why, but God must have had a reason.
I do hope that I will see my aunt again, but I hope that even though I love her, that it doesn't come soon, unless it's in my dreams.
Judaism challenges us to sit back and say, you know what, we were lucky to have had him. We were lucky to have had her as long as we did. That's a wonderful message for our children, that you know what, life is for the living, but our response to death is what life is all about and how we grow as people. And that's the message of Judaism, that we can take somebody's life through loss and make it meaningful. What a great tradition.